I fell for the girl who wrote a love letter to my brother, and I almost lost her because I couldn't admit it. It started in the worst way possible. This girl from my class, Allie, walked up to me in the hallway holding a pink envelope. My friends started whistling and making jokes, assuming it was for me. I opened it halfway and saw, "I've been watching you for months," written in careful handwriting. Not this again. I tried handing it back politely. "You seem nice, but you're not really my type. Sorry." She blinked at me twice, then burst out laughing. "That letter's not for you. It's for your brother Daniel. I just need you to pass it along." The entire hallway exploded. I stood there completely humiliated while everyone laughed. In the heat of the moment, I ripped that pink envelope right down the middle and kept tearing until it was confetti on the floor. "My brother's taken," I said coldly. "And even if he wasn't, he wouldn't be interested." Allie stared at the pieces scattered across the tiles. My friends dragged me away before she could respond. After that, we became enemies. Every time we passed each other at school, we'd trade insults like it was a competition. "Oh look, it's the guy who destroys people's property," she'd say at her locker. "Oh look, it's the girl who can't take a hint," I'd fire back. Our friends thought we were flirting. We'd both scrunch our faces and say, "You, never," at the exact same time, which only made them laugh harder. Then we got paired for a class project. 3 weeks of arguing about presentation slides and font choices. But one afternoon, we both reached for the same textbook, and our hands touched. We jerked back like we'd been electrocuted, the book slamming onto the floor. "You're not gonna make this weird, right?" she said, her face flushing red. "Me? You freaked out first," I shot back, trying to seem unaffected. But things changed after that. We weren't arguing as much. She started saving me a seat in class. She'd look for me when I wasn't there. And one day, while we were studying in the library, I dozed off. I woke up to her fingers carefully moving hair out of my face. When I opened my eyes, she jerked her hand away, flustered. "Sorry, you had hair in your face. It was annoying, but I liked it." I caught her hand and placed it back on my head, closing my eyes again. "You should go to prom this year," I said. "It's coming up soon." She laughed softly, still playing with my hair. "Sorry, you're not my type." The callback made me smile, but then I got serious. "I mean it. I want to see you there." She paused. "Are you asking me to—" The librarian appeared. "Library's closing in 5 minutes." We grabbed our stuff and left without finishing the conversation. When I got home, my brother Daniel was sitting on my bed holding pieces of pink paper taped together. The letter. I'd kept it in my desk drawer without knowing why. "A love letter for me, huh?" He grinned. "My girlfriend and I just broke up. I've been thinking about asking someone new to prom. This Allie girl seems sweet." He looked at me with that expression he always made when he wanted something I had. "You two are close, right? Think she'd say yes?" I stood there feeling like the floor was sinking beneath me while he talked about his promposal plan, how jealous his ex would be. That night, I snuck out and threw rocks at Allie's window until she came outside. "Daniel's planning to ask you to prom," I told her. "Monday." Her face lit up in a way that absolutely destroyed me. "Really? Oh my God. I need to figure out what to wear." I grabbed her hand. "Don't say yes." She stopped, studied my face, and slowly, she understood. "There's no way you actually like me," she said. "You've been awful to me for months. You're the first girl I've ever liked." The words came out before I could stop them. "I didn't know how to act around you. I thought being mean would make the feelings go away. They just got stronger." She shook her head slowly. "Daniel's really sweet. I've liked him for so long." Her voice cracked. "But he never made me laugh until my stomach hurt. He never made me feel the way you do when we're arguing about stupid homework." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. My own letter, written that afternoon. "If you choose me," I said, "this is yours." She took it, read it slowly, and when she looked up, she was smiling. On prom night, Daniel showed up at her house with flowers and a whole plan. But she wasn't there. She was already with me, dancing in the gym like nobody else existed. Sometimes the person you're meant to be with is the one you least expect, even if you have to destroy a love letter to figure it out. I woke up the next morning with my face pressed into my pillow and this weird, happy feeling in my chest. For about 5 seconds, I forgot everything and just lay there smiling. Then I heard a door slam downstairs so hard the whole house shook. Another slam, then another. My stomach dropped. Daniel was home. I grabbed my phone and saw 3 texts from Carson already. The first one just said dude, with like 6 question marks. The second one asked if I was still alive. The third one said half the school was texting him, asking if it was true that I went to prom with Allie. I typed back that yeah, it happened, and that Daniel found out the hard way. Carson responded immediately asking how bad it was. I told him it was pretty rough, but I didn't regret it. He sent back a thumbs up and said everyone at the school was losing their minds about it. Apparently people had been making bets about when Allie and I would finally get together, and now they were all collecting. I put my phone down and stared at my ceiling. Another door slammed downstairs. I should probably go face him, but also, I really didn't want to. My phone buzzed again, and I grabbed it hoping it was Allie, but it was just Carson saying that everyone knew it would happen eventually, that we were obvious. I wanted to text back something sarcastic, but honestly, he was probably right. I finally forced myself out of bed and pulled on a shirt. The house smelled like coffee and toast. I could hear my parents talking in low voices in the kitchen, the kind of careful, quiet talking they did when they were worried about something. I stood at the top of the stairs for a minute trying to make myself go down. My phone buzzed. This time it was Allie. She asked if I was okay and if Daniel had killed me yet. I smiled and texted back that I was still breathing, but barely. She sent back a heart emoji and said to text her after. I put my phone in my pocket and went downstairs. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal and staring at his bowl like it had personally offended him. Mom and Dad were both standing by the counter holding coffee mugs and looking uncomfortable. Mom's face did this thing when she saw me, like she was trying to smile but also looked worried. Dad just nodded at me and took a sip of his coffee. I grabbed a bowl from the cabinet and the cereal box from the counter. Nobody said anything. I poured cereal and milk and sat down at the other end of the table from Daniel. The only sound was spoons hitting bowls. Mom cleared her throat. She asked if we wanted to talk about what happened last night. Daniel stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. He dumped his bowl in the sink without even rinsing it and walked out. I heard his footsteps going up the stairs and then his bedroom door closing. Not slamming this time, just closing. Somehow that felt worse. Mom sighed and looked at Dad. Dad looked at me and asked if I was all right. I said, yeah, I was fine. He nodded slowly, like he didn't really believe me, but wasn't going to push it. I ate my cereal in silence while my parents exchanged more worried looks. After I finished, I went back upstairs and lay on my bed staring at my phone. I should text Allie. I wanted to hear her voice. I pulled up her contact and called instead of texting. She answered on the second ring. Her voice sounded happy and a little breathless like she'd been running. She asked how it went. I told her Daniel wasn't speaking to me and that breakfast was the most awkward thing I'd ever experienced. She said she was sorry and asked if I regretted it. I said no, not even a little bit. She got quiet for a second and then said she didn't regret it either. We talked for almost 2 hours about everything. About prom and how perfect the night was. About Daniel showing up at her house with flowers and how her mom had to tell him she'd already left. About how scared we both were that this wouldn't work out. She told me Isla had texted her that morning saying we were disgustingly cute together. We both laughed at that. She said Isla kept making gagging noises every time we looked at each other during the dance. I asked what she was doing right now, and she said lying on her bed talking to me. I could hear her smiling through the phone. She asked what I was doing, and I said the exact same thing. She laughed and said we were boring. I said I didn't care. We could be boring together. She made this soft sound like a happy sigh. I told her I'd see her at the school Monday, and she said she couldn't wait. After we hung up, I lay there holding my phone against my chest, feeling like an idiot, but also not caring. Monday morning, I met Allie at her locker before first period. She was wearing this blue shirt that made her eyes look even brighter than usual. I told her that, and her whole face turned red. She punched my arm, but she was smiling. We walked to class together and people kept stopping us in the hallway. Someone congratulated us. Someone else said they called it months ago. A group of girls from Allie's art class surrounded us and asked how it happened and if we were officially together now. It was embarrassing, but also kind of nice. Like everyone was acknowledging something we'd been too stubborn to see. At lunch, Carson and Dominic saved us seats at their table. This was the first time Allie and I were really part of the same friend group, instead of eating at separate tables and glaring at each other. Everyone immediately started making jokes about all the time we wasted arguing when we could have been together. Dominic said he'd never seen two people fight so much over nothing. Carson said we were exhausting to watch. Allie laughed and leaned against my shoulder. I felt my face get hot, but I didn't move away. The whole first week was like that. People being happy for us or making jokes. Teachers smiling when they saw us together in the hallways. But Daniel avoided me completely. He took different routes to class. If I walked into a room he was in, he'd leave. At dinner, he'd eat fast and go back to his room. Mom tried to get us to talk about it, but Daniel would just say he was fine and change the subject. Dad pulled me aside one night and asked if I'd tried apologizing. I said I had, but Daniel wouldn't listen. Dad nodded and said to give him time. But I was starting to worry I'd broken something that couldn't be fixed. Friday night, Allie and I went on our first real date. Not prom, not a school project, just the two of us at the pizza place downtown. We sat in a booth by the window and ordered a large pizza to split. It felt weird at first. Good weird. Like we were still figuring out how to be normal around each other. She reached across the table and took my hand. I looked at our hands together and felt my face get hot again. She grinned and said I turned red every time she did anything nice. I said that wasn't true, and she raised her eyebrows. I admitted, okay, maybe it was a little true. She laughed and squeezed my hand. We talked about everything and nothing. About summer plans and college someday and what we wanted to do after graduation. It was easy. Easier than it had ever been when we were pretending to hate each other. On the walk back to my car, she held my hand and bumped against my shoulder. I asked if she was happy, and she said, yeah, really happy. That week, Isla told Allie that Daniel had been saying stuff about her at the school, that he dodged a bullet because she was too dramatic anyway. Allie told me about it while we were sitting on her front porch after school. I started to get mad, but she just laughed. She said she was glad he was processing it however he needed to, even if it meant making her the villain. She said it was better than him being sad. I asked if it bothered her, and she said not really. She knew it was just his ego talking. The next weekend, Carson texted asking if Allie and I wanted to hang out with him and Dominic and some other people. We met up at the park near school. It was the first time we were all together as one group instead of separate camps. Everyone immediately started joking about how much energy we'd wasted arguing. Someone said they'd never seen two people try so hard to pretend they didn't like each other. Allie buried her face in my shoulder, and I could feel her laughing. Carson said we were the most obvious people in the entire school. Dominic agreed and said even the teachers knew. I said that was impossible, but then I remembered how our English teacher smiled when she paired us for projects. Maybe everyone really did know before we did. 2 weeks after prom, I was in my room doing homework when I heard noise from the garage. I went downstairs and found Daniel working on his car. He had the hood up and was leaning over the engine with a wrench. I stood in the doorway for a minute watching him. He didn't tell me to leave. That felt like progress. I walked over and grabbed another wrench from the toolbox. I asked if he needed help and he shrugged without looking at me. I took that as a yes. We worked in silence for over an hour, handing each other tools, adjusting parts, not talking, but also not fighting. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it wasn't nothing either. Daniel's wrench slipped and clanged against the engine block. He wiped his hands on his jeans and looked over at me. Do you actually like her? His voice came out flat and tired. Or did you just want to win? I set down the socket wrench I'd been holding. The question hit different from I expected. I didn't even know I liked her until it was almost too late. The words felt heavy coming out. I thought I was just annoyed by her. Then one day in the library, she fell asleep on my shoulder, and I realized I'd been lying to myself for months. I picked at the grease under my fingernails. I never meant to hurt you. Daniel nodded slowly and went back to adjusting something in the engine. We worked quietly for another few minutes. Then he straightened up and faced me. I wasn't really into her that much. He shrugged. I liked the idea of making Sarah jealous, having a hot date to prom, making everyone think I was doing great after the breakup. He kicked at the concrete floor. I'm more mad you kept it secret than about losing a girl I barely knew. That made it better and worse at the same time. Better because he wasn't actually heartbroken. Worse because I'd damaged our relationship over something he didn't even care about that much. I opened my mouth to say something, but he'd already gone back to the car. We finished the oil change without talking about it again. 3 days later, I was sitting in chemistry class watching Allie laugh at something her lab partner said. Danilo leaned in close to point at something in their textbook, and she laughed again. My chest got tight. I stared at them until Allie looked up and caught me. She raised her eyebrows like she was asking what my problem was. I looked away fast. After class, she cornered me by my locker. What was that about? What was what about? I shoved my chemistry book into the locker harder than necessary. You were staring at me and Danilo like we were doing something wrong. She crossed her arms. We were literally just doing the lab assignment. He was sitting really close to you. Are you serious right now? Her voice went up. You spent months pretending to hate me. You were mean to me in front of everyone. And now you're mad because my lab partner made me laugh? People in the hallway were starting to look at us. I grabbed her hand and pulled her into an empty classroom. I just don't like how he looks at you. That's ridiculous. She pulled her hand away. You don't get to be possessive now. Not after everything. She was right, and I knew it. I sat down on one of the desks. I'm sorry. You're right. That was stupid. Allie sat down next to me. We need to actually talk to each other when something bothers us. Her voice got softer. We can't fall back into saying mean things just because we're uncomfortable. I know. I looked at her. I'm still figuring out how to do this, how to be with someone. Me too. She bumped her shoulder against mine. But I like that we can be honest with each other, even when it's hard. That Friday at dinner, Daniel seemed different, lighter somehow. Mom passed him the potatoes and he actually smiled. So I asked Haley Massey to hang out this weekend. Haley from your English class? Dad asked. Yeah, we've been talking a lot lately. Daniel scooped potatoes onto his plate. She's really into photography. She showed me some of her work, and it's actually amazing. He kept talking about how she'd taken pictures at the state park and how she wanted to study art in college. His whole face changed when he talked about her. Not like he was trying to prove something, just genuinely happy. Mom and Dad exchanged looks. The tension that had been sitting over our family dinners for weeks started to lift. Daniel even looked at me without the angry expression he'd been wearing since prom. Progress. The next week, Allie and I were lying on her bed doing homework. She got up and opened her nightstand drawer. I want to show you something. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. My letter. The one I'd given her that night outside her window. My face got hot. You kept that? Of course I kept it. She sat back down next to me. I read it sometimes when I need to remember that taking risks can lead to good things. She opened it and showed me my own handwriting. I'd written about how she made me feel alive even when we were fighting. How I'd never met anyone who challenged me the way she did. How scared I was that I'd already ruined everything. I can't believe you actually read that. I covered my face with my hands. She laughed and pulled my hands away. It's sweet, and it's real. That's why I keep it. Carson texted our group chat about planning a beach trip after finals. Everyone responded fast with excited messages. Then Carson sent a separate text, just to me. Will it be weird with Daniel? I typed back. Probably. But we have to start somewhere. The trip got planned for the Saturday after our last final. Everyone was going. Carson and Dominic, Isla and some other friends from the school, and Daniel said he was bringing Haley. I told Allie it might be awkward, and she said we'd deal with it. The beach was packed when we got there. Our group claimed a spot near the volleyball nets and spread out towels. Daniel and Haley showed up 20 minutes later. He nodded at me when they walked up. Not friendly exactly, but not hostile either. They set up their stuff away from us, but not dramatically far away. The day went better than I expected. Daniel and Haley stayed together most of the time. They went swimming while we played volleyball. They walked down the beach while we ate sandwiches. He mostly ignored me and Allie, but it wasn't mean, just neutral, like we were people who happened to be at the same beach. By late afternoon, everyone was tired and sun-worn. Carson suggested one more swim before we packed up. We all went into the water together. The waves were bigger than earlier. Dominic got knocked over by one and came up laughing and spitting salt water. Isla tried to dive under a wave and mistimed it. Even Daniel was smiling and joking with everyone. When we got back to our towels, Daniel grabbed a soda from the cooler. He looked at me for a second, then tossed me one without saying anything. I caught it and nodded thanks. Small thing, but it felt huge. Everyone else started packing up their stuff. Allie asked if we could stay a little longer to watch the sunset. I told Carson we'd catch up with them later. We sat on our towel watching the sky turn orange and pink. The beach got quieter as people left. I'm glad you destroyed that first letter. Allie leaned against my shoulder. Yeah? I wrapped my arm around her. It led to something real instead of a fantasy crush. She picked up a handful of sand and let it fall through her fingers. If you'd just given Daniel that letter, I would have gone to prom with him and probably realized halfway through the night that I didn't actually know him. That I'd built up this idea of him in my head that wasn't real. So I should destroy things more often? I grinned at her. She threw sand at me. Don't push it. We stayed until the sun dropped below the horizon and the first stars came out. Then we packed up our stuff and headed to the parking lot. The whole drive home, I kept thinking about how different everything was now. How Daniel had tossed me that soda. How Allie kept her hand on my knee the whole drive. How things were actually getting better instead of worse. Monday morning in English class, our teacher started assigning partners for the final project. When she got to me and Allie, everyone groaned. That's so unfair, someone called out. They get to work together. Our teacher just smiled. I'm glad you two finally figured things out. Allie looked at me and grinned. We grabbed our stuff and moved to sit together. Remember when we had to do that presentation on symbolism? She whispered. You mean when we argued about font size for 20 minutes? Exactly. She opened her notebook. This is going to be so much better. We spent the next week working on our project in the library after school. The same table where I'd fallen asleep and she'd touched my hair. Now she held my hand while we argued about whether the green light in Gatsby represented hope or delusion. Her fingers traced circles on my palm while she insisted it was both. I said that was a cop-out answer, and she kicked me under the table. The librarian walked past and smiled at us. We'd become one of those couples that everyone recognized. Allie pulled out her notes and spread them across the table. I leaned over to read them, and she rested her head on my shoulder. This was so much easier than pretending we didn't want to be close. She said exactly that while highlighting a passage in the book. I kissed the top of her head and told her I was an idiot for wasting so much time being mean to her. She looked up at me and grinned. Then she went back to highlighting like nothing happened. I invited Allie to dinner at my house on Friday. My stomach felt weird all day thinking about it. Daniel would be there. My parents would be watching everything. She showed up at 6 wearing a blue dress and holding flowers for my mom. I opened the door and she smiled at me. Then Daniel appeared behind me. He looked at Allie for a second, then stepped back. He told her it was nice to meet her properly. His voice was polite, but not warm. She handed him the flowers by accident because she was nervous. He took them and said he'd give them to Mom. We all stood in the doorway like idiots until my dad called us to the table. Mom was overly cheerful, asking Allie about her classes and her art and her college plans. She kept refilling Allie's water glass even when it was still full. Dad focused on passing the potatoes and the chicken and asking neutral questions about the weather. Daniel ate quietly and didn't look at either of us. I held Allie's hand under the table and she squeezed back. The meal lasted forever. Every minute felt like 10. Mom brought out dessert and told a long story about when Daniel and I were kids. Allie laughed at the right parts and asked questions. Daniel finally looked at her when she asked him about his classes. He answered in full sentences. Not friendly exactly, but not hostile either. After dinner, Daniel asked if he could talk to me. Allie went to help Mom with dishes. We went out to the garage and stood by his car. He leaned against the hood and crossed his arms. I waited for him to yell or tell me I was a terrible brother. Instead, he said Allie seemed cool. He said he understood why I liked her. She was funny and smart and pretty. Then he said he was sorry for being a jerk about everything. His voice got quieter. Haley had helped him realize something. He'd been more hurt about his ex than actually interested in Allie. He'd wanted to ask her to prom because it would make him look good and make his ex jealous. Not because he genuinely liked her. He'd been using the idea of Allie as a band-aid for his ego. I didn't know what to say. He pushed off the car and told me he was glad I was happy. Then he went back inside. I stood in the garage for a few minutes trying to process what just happened. The next week, Carson pulled me aside at lunch. He had this weird grin on his face. He told me that Isla had told him something. Allie had told Isla she was falling in love with me. The cafeteria noise got louder and quieter at the same time. I felt my face get hot. Carson laughed and asked why I looked so freaked out. I told him I hadn't said it yet. He laughed harder. He said I was scared of the girl I'd literally fought with for months. I told him to shut up, but he kept going. He said everyone could see how I felt about her. It was obvious in the way I looked at her, the way I smiled when she walked into a room. I grabbed my tray and left before he could say anything else. I spent the rest of lunch hiding in the library trying to figure out what to do. That night, I snuck into our neighbor's garden and picked flowers from their rose bushes. Technically stealing, but in a romantic way. I walked to Allie's house and threw pebbles at her window. She opened it and looked down at me. She was wearing pajamas and her hair was messy. She started laughing immediately. She asked if this was going to be my signature move now, showing up at her window with rocks and plans. I held up the flowers. She told me to wait there and disappeared from the window. She climbed out her window and down the trellis by her porch. I met her in the backyard under the big tree. She took the flowers and smelled them. Then she looked at me waiting. I stood there like an idiot not knowing how to start. Finally, I just said it. I told her I loved her. The words came out rough and too loud. She smiled and set the flowers on the ground. Then she kissed me. When she pulled back, she said she loved me too. She'd known it that day in the library when I fell asleep. She couldn't stop touching my hair. She couldn't stop looking at me. She'd known then, but was too scared to admit it. We sat under the tree for an hour talking about nothing and everything. She leaned against me, and I played with her hair the way she'd done to me that day. We started making plans for summer. I'd gotten a job at the community pool as a lifeguard. She'd be teaching art classes at the rec center right next door. We'd have the same schedule. She joked that we'd probably find new things to argue about. I said I was counting on it. She punched my arm, and I caught her hand. We were sitting on her front steps in the dark. Her parents had gone to bed an hour ago. She said she wanted to spend the whole summer with me. Every day if possible. I told her that sounded perfect. She asked what we'd do when college started and we might be in different places. I said we'd figure it out. We'd make it work. She nodded and rested her head on my shoulder. Daniel knocked on my bedroom door the next Saturday. He asked if I wanted to play video games. I followed him downstairs to the living room. We hadn't done this in months, not since before his breakup. We played for 2 hours without talking much, just focused on the game. Then during a loading screen, he said Haley was coming over later. He asked if Allie wanted to come too. Maybe we could all hang out. I texted Allie and she said yes. When they got there, we ordered pizza and played more games. Daniel teased me about being whipped when Allie asked me to get her a soda. I teased him back about how he checked his phone every 2 minutes to see if Haley texted. She was sitting right next to him. Haley and Allie laughed at both of us. It felt normal, like we were actually brothers again, instead of rivals fighting over the same girl. Graduation practice started the next week. They seated us alphabetically, so Allie and I were far apart. She was in the front near the A names. I was in the middle. We kept making faces at each other across the gym. She'd stick her tongue out. I'd cross my eyes. The principal had to tell us twice to pay attention. Our friends sitting near us were cracking up. Even the teachers were trying not to smile. Carson leaned over and whispered that we were still annoying even when we were happy. I told him that was the plan. After practice, Kramer came up to me by the parking lot. He said Daniel seemed better now than he'd been with his ex. Haley was good for him. She actually cared about what he thought and felt. His ex had just liked the attention. I realized Kramer was right. Daniel had needed to figure out what he actually wanted instead of just reacting to being dumped. He'd needed to find someone who liked him for real reasons, not just because he was popular or good-looking. I watched Daniel and Haley walk to his car holding hands. He looked relaxed, happy, not trying to prove anything to anyone. Allie's mom called my mom on a Wednesday afternoon and invited our whole family over for a barbecue that weekend. Mom accepted immediately and spent the next 3 days planning what to bring and reminding me to be polite. I told her I was always polite, which made her laugh. Saturday arrived hot and sunny. We drove to Allie's house with a bowl of potato salad and a pie Mom had baked that morning. Allie's dad opened the door wearing an apron that said Grill Master and shook my dad's hand like they were old friends. They headed straight to the backyard where the grill was already smoking. Mom and Allie's mom disappeared into the kitchen, talking about recipes and college applications. I found Allie setting up chairs on the patio. She smiled when she saw me and grabbed my hand. We arranged the furniture together while our dads argued good-naturedly about charcoal versus gas grilling. Daniel showed up 20 minutes later with Haley. I tensed up automatically, but he just nodded at me and introduced Haley to Allie's parents. Haley complimented the garden, and Allie's mom lit up showing her the tomato plants. The afternoon settled into something surprisingly normal. Our dads bonded over meat temperatures and seasoning techniques. Our moms sat at the patio table with iced tea discussing which colleges had the best programs. Daniel and Haley sat on the steps talking quietly. Allie squeezed my hand and pulled me toward the house. We slipped inside while everyone was distracted by the food. Her room was at the end of the upstairs hallway. Band posters covered one wall, and her desk was covered in art supplies. She pulled a large black portfolio from under her bed and set it on the floor. I sat down next to her as she opened it. The first few pages showed landscape paintings and still life studies. Then she flipped to a page that made me stop breathing. 2 figures stood in a school hallway. One held torn pieces of pink paper. The other stood frozen with shock on their face. Pink confetti scattered across the floor tiles. The colors were bold and the lines were angry. She'd captured that exact moment when everything started. I looked at her, and she was watching my face. She said she'd painted it a month after the hallway incident. She said she'd been so mad at me, but also confused about why it hurt so much. She said painting it helped her understand what she was feeling. I told her it was incredible. She flipped through more pages showing other moments I recognized. The library with 2 people studying. The classroom with the textbook on the floor. Her window at night with rocks on the ground below. She'd been processing our entire story through her art. I asked what she would have done if I hadn't warned her about Daniel's proposal. She closed the portfolio and looked at the ceiling. She said she probably would have said yes because she'd liked him for so long. She said she would have gotten ready and been excited and gone to prom with him. Then she said she probably would have spent the whole night wishing she was with me instead. She said she would have realized during some slow song that she wanted to be dancing with the guy who made her laugh and argued with her about homework. She said she was glad it didn't happen that way because this felt more honest. We'd both chosen each other knowing exactly what we were getting into. No fantasies or what-ifs, just real feelings that we'd both been too scared to admit. I kissed her, and she kissed me back, and we stayed in her room until her mom called up the stairs that food was ready. Finals week hit us like a truck. I had 3 tests in 2 days, plus a presentation for history class. Allie had 4 tests and a portfolio review for art. We met at the library every afternoon in the same spot where she'd played with my hair months ago. The table felt smaller now that we sat on the same side instead of across from each other. She'd spread out her notes, and I'd lean over to look at mine, and our shoulders would touch. The librarian walked by on Tuesday afternoon and stopped at our table. She looked at us over her glasses and smiled. She said she was glad we were using the library for actual studying now, instead of whatever was happening before. Allie's face turned red, and I tried not to laugh. The librarian walked away, still smiling. We studied for 3 more hours, making flashcards and quizzing each other. Allie fell asleep on my shoulder around 7. I let her sleep for 20 minutes before waking her up. We gathered our stuff and walked to the parking lot holding hands. She said she was stressed about her art portfolio review. I told her she was the most talented person I knew, and she had nothing to worry about. She kissed me and said I was biased, but she appreciated it anyway. The last day of school felt weird and exciting at the same time. Teachers played movies instead of teaching. People signed yearbooks in the hallways. Someone had started an online poll about cutest couple and posted it in the class group chat. Allie and I won by a landslide. She showed me the results on her phone during lunch and laughed. She said it was because everyone loves a good enemies to lovers story. I said it was because she was the prettiest girl in the school and I was lucky. She rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. Carson sat down at our table and said we were gross. Dominic agreed. Isla told them they were just jealous. The bell rang for last period, and we all walked to class together. The principal made announcements about summer reading and fall registration. Everyone cheered when he said school was officially over. People rushed out of classrooms into the parking lot. Allie and I walked slowly, taking our time. She said she couldn't believe we'd made it through the year. I said I couldn't believe we'd spent half of it pretending to hate each other. She laughed and said, at least we figured it out eventually. Carson threw an end-of-year party at his house the following weekend. His parents were out of town visiting family, so the whole place was ours. People showed up around 8 with food and drinks. Music played from speakers in the living room. Daniel arrived with Haley around 9. I saw them come in and felt my stomach tighten, but Daniel just waved and headed to the kitchen. Haley stopped to talk to Allie about something. Carson set up video games in the basement, and a bunch of us headed down. Daniel and Haley came too. We split into teams for a racing game. Daniel and I ended up on the same team against Allie and Haley. It felt weird at first, but then the game started, and we just focused on winning. Daniel called out directions, and I followed them. We worked together without thinking about it. We won the first round and high-fived automatically. Allie and Haley demanded a rematch. We played for 2 more hours, switching teams and games. At one point, Dominic made a joke about how Daniel and I used to fight over everything, and now we were actually getting along. Daniel shrugged and said, "People change." I looked at him, and he looked back, and something passed between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. We'd both moved on to people who actually made us happy. Later that night, Allie and I sat on Carson's back porch, away from the noise inside. She leaned against me and said it was weird how much time we'd wasted being mean to each other. She said we could have been happy this whole time instead of making each other miserable. I said maybe we needed that time to figure out who we were first. She said that sounded wise, but also like something from a movie. I laughed and said I'd been watching too many romantic comedies with her. She punched my arm lightly. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, just listening to the party sounds from inside. She said she was excited for summer. I said I was too. She asked if I thought we'd still be together by next year. I told her I wasn't planning on going anywhere. She smiled and kissed me and said good answer. I finally threw away the taped-together pieces of Allie's original letter to Daniel. I'd kept them in my desk drawer all this time for reasons I couldn't explain. Now it felt wrong to have them. They belonged to a different version of us. People who didn't know what they wanted yet. I tore the pieces into even smaller pieces and dropped them in the trash. It felt symbolic somehow. Allie called while I was doing it, and I told her what I'd just done. She was quiet for a second, then said we should write new letters to each other every year on prom night. She said it would help us remember how we got here and why we chose each other. I told her that was the most romantic thing I'd ever heard. She laughed and said I should write that down for my first letter. We stayed on the phone for another hour talking about nothing important. Just the sound of her voice made me happy. Summer started officially, and we fell into an easy routine. I worked at the community pool as a lifeguard from 10 to 6. Allie taught art classes at the rec center right next door from 11 to 5. We'd meet for lunch at the picnic tables between our buildings. After work, we'd hang out with friends or go to her house or mine. My parents joked that they never saw me anymore. Mom would make comments at dinner about how I was always gone. Dad would ask if I even lived there still, but they were smiling when they said it. They were clearly happy that Daniel and I were getting along again, that things felt normal in our house for the first time in months. Daniel and I started playing video games together again on weekends. We'd sit in the living room like we used to and just focus on the game. Sometimes Haley and Allie would come over and we'd all hang out together. It felt good, like we'd found our way back to being brothers instead of competitors. One night, Allie and I lay in her backyard looking at stars. The grass was cool and slightly damp. She pointed out constellations she'd learned in science class. I pretended to follow along, but mostly, I just watched her talk. She turned her head to look at me and caught me staring. She asked if I ever regretted tearing up that first letter. I thought about it for a real minute. I told her I regretted how I handled it. I regretted being cruel and embarrassing her in front of everyone. I regretted all the time we wasted fighting when we could have been together. But I didn't regret where we ended up. She said that was the right answer. She rolled onto her side, facing me. She said destroying that letter was the worst thing and the best thing I ever did. It hurt her, but it also led to something real. Something better than any fantasy she'd had about Daniel. I pulled her closer, and we lay there until her dad called from the back door that it was getting late. We walked to the front yard, and I kissed her goodnight. She went inside, and I drove home, feeling like the luckiest person alive. Daniel caught me in the driveway the next afternoon while I was pulling weeds from the garden bed. He sat down on the curb and watched me work for a minute before saying anything. Finally, he told me he was glad everything worked out the way it did. He said he really liked Haley and wouldn't have given her a chance if he'd been focused on Allie. I stopped pulling weeds and looked at him. I told him I was glad too. We sat there for a while, not saying much, just existing in the same space without tension. It felt like we were actually brothers again, instead of two people who happened to share a last name. He asked if I wanted to grab food later, and I said yeah. He stood up and went back inside. I finished the weeds, feeling lighter than I had in months. My first week at the community pool started on Monday. I showed up at 9:30 to get the keys and chemicals from the manager. By 10, the first families started arriving with kids screaming and running straight for the water. I climbed up into the lifeguard chair and settled in for 6 hours of watching people swim. Around 11, a group of kids swam over to my station and asked if Allie was my girlfriend. I told them yes, and they giggled and swam away. 20 minutes later, a different group asked the same question. I said yes again. This happened 4 more times before lunch. Each time I said yes, it felt good. Like I was sharing something I was proud of, instead of hiding it. Around noon, Allie showed up with sandwiches from the deli down the street. She handed one up to me, and the other lifeguards started making jokes about me being spoiled. She stuck her tongue out at them and told me she'd see me after work. The kids in the pool started whispering and pointing. One of them yelled that we should kiss. Allie's face turned red, and she left quickly while I tried not to laugh. The rest of the day went by fast. Kids kept swimming and asking questions, and I kept saying yes, she's my girlfriend, until the words felt natural and easy. The rec center did an art showcase on Saturday afternoon. Parents and families crowded into the main room to look at paintings and drawings from Allie's summer class. I found her standing next to a large canvas mounted on the wall. The painting showed 2 people in a school hallway with pink pieces of paper scattered on the floor between them. She'd painted it in shades of gray and blue except for the pink paper, which stood out bright and sharp. An older woman asked her about it, and Allie explained that it was about how sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes if you're brave enough to be honest. The woman nodded and moved to the next painting. I stood next to Allie and stared at the hallway scene. She'd captured the exact moment everything changed. The anger and confusion and hurt all mixed together on a canvas. She squeezed my hand and said she almost didn't include it because it felt too personal. I told her I was glad she did. We stayed there for another hour while people walked through and looked at student work. Several people came back to ask more questions about the hallway painting. Each time Allie told the story a little differently, but the core stayed the same. Destruction leading to something better. Carson organized a beach trip for the following weekend. He borrowed his dad's van and picked everyone up early Saturday morning. Me and Allie sat in the back. Daniel and Haley took the middle row. Carson drove while Dominic controlled the music, and Isla called out directions from her phone. We got to the beach around 10 and claimed a spot near the water. Everyone stripped down to swimsuits and ran toward the waves. The water was cold and rough, but nobody cared. We spent hours swimming and playing volleyball and burying Dominic in the sand up to his neck. Around lunch, we ordered pizza from a place nearby and ate on our towels while the sun dried our skin. I looked around at everyone laughing and talking and realized this was the first time all of us hung out as a real friend group. No tension or awkwardness or people choosing sides. Just 7 people having fun together. It felt easy in a way nothing had felt easy before, like all the energy I'd wasted on pretending and hiding could finally go towards something better. Allie leaned against my shoulder and asked what I was thinking about. I told her I was thinking about how much simpler everything was now. She said yeah, and closed her eyes. That night, after everyone else went to bed, Daniel and I stayed up on the beach. We'd rented a house for the weekend and the others were crashed in various rooms. Daniel and I sat in beach chairs watching the waves come in under moonlight. He was quiet for a long time before he started talking. He admitted he was jealous of how easily I connected with Allie. He said watching us together made him realize he'd never had that with anyone. His ex-girlfriend had been pretty and popular, but they never talked about real things. Never laughed until their stomachs hurt. He said he was learning that real relationships take work and honesty, not just surface-level attraction. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. He talked about Haley and how different it felt with her. How they actually communicated instead of just existing next to each other. He said he was trying to be better at being vulnerable and honest. I told him I was proud of how much he'd grown. He laughed and said that was a weird thing for a younger brother to say, but he looked happy when he said it. We stayed out there until almost 3 in the morning just talking about life and relationships and how much we'd both changed. When we finally went inside, I felt like I'd gotten my brother back for real. Allie and I hit our 3-month anniversary on a Wednesday. She said it was significant because it was longer than we spent openly hating each other. I took her to the pizza place where we had our first real date. We ordered the same thing and sat in the same booth. She brought up college plans and asked if I'd thought about where I wanted to go. I told her I was looking at schools in the same area as the art schools she was considering. She asked if I was doing that just for her. I said partially yeah, but also because the programs looked good. We both knew it was early to make plans like that. We'd only been together 3 months, but we wanted to try. After dinner, we drove around town with the windows down and music playing. She asked me what I thought we'd be doing in 5 years. I said probably still arguing about stupid things, but in a good way. She laughed and said that was the most realistic answer I could have given. We ended up at the park where we used to meet for our class project. Sat on the same bench where we'd argued about presentation fonts. She said everything felt full circle. I said it felt more like a spiral. Same places, but different people. Better people. Mom found the letter I wrote to Allie while she was cleaning my room. I came home from work to find her sitting on my bed holding the folded paper. She asked if she could read it. I felt my face get hot, but I told her yes. She read it slowly while I stood in the doorway trying not to die of embarrassment. When she finished, she had tears in her eyes. She said she was proud of me for being brave enough to be vulnerable, for putting my feelings into words instead of hiding them. I mumbled something about it being no big deal. She stood up and hugged me and said it was a big deal. She said watching me and Daniel work through everything had been hard, but seeing us both in healthy relationships now made it worth it. I asked her not to tell Dad about the letter. She laughed and said too late she'd already texted him a picture of it. I groaned, and she left my room still smiling. Later, Dad came in and told me the letter was good. That was it. Just good. Then he left. But coming from Dad, that meant a lot. The next family dinner happened on Sunday. Mom made pot roast and everyone actually showed up on time. We sat around the table passing food and talking about normal things. Then Daniel cleared his throat and announced that he and Haley were official and serious. Mom got excited and started asking questions about Haley's family and plans. Dad just nodded and said that was good. I kicked Daniel under the table and he kicked me back, but we were both smiling. Mom said she was happy both her sons were in healthy relationships. Dad joked that the house was too peaceful now without me and Daniel fighting. He said he almost missed the yelling. We all laughed. Daniel threw a roll at me. I threw it back. Mom told us to stop acting like children, but she was laughing too. For the first time in months, dinner felt normal, like we were actually a family instead of 4 people sharing a house. Allie and I had our first real fight on a Tuesday night. She called me upset because I'd made plans with Carson and Dominic without telling her. She said I was spending too much time with my friends and not enough with her. I got defensive and said she was being clingy. She went quiet on the other end. I immediately knew I'd messed up. I apologized and asked if we could talk in person. She said fine. I drove to her house and we sat in my car in her driveway. She explained that she didn't want to be clingy, but she also wanted to feel like a priority. I told her she was a priority, but I also needed time with my friends. We talked through it calmly, instead of letting it explode into something bigger. She admitted she was being a little unreasonable. I admitted I should have communicated better. We made a plan to check in with each other about plans before making them. It felt good to work through a problem like adults, instead of screaming or shutting down. She said we were both learning how to be in a real relationship. I said yeah, and communication was getting easier with practice. She kissed me and said she was glad we could talk about hard things. I drove home feeling like we'd actually accomplished something important. The next morning, I picked Allie up early. She had her sketchbook tucked under one arm and wore this yellow dress that made her look like sunshine. We drove to the art museum first, because she'd been talking about this new exhibit for weeks. I followed her through the galleries while she stopped at every painting to explain what she loved about it. The way she got excited about brushstrokes and color theory made me smile, even though I didn't understand half of what she said. She grabbed my hand and pulled me to this huge abstract piece that was mostly blue and green swirls. She asked what I thought, and I said it looked like the ocean during a storm. Her face lit up, and she said, "That's exactly what the artist intended." I realized I didn't care about the paintings at all, but I cared about watching her care about them. We spent 3 hours there, and she took photos of her favorite pieces to reference later for her own work. When we left, she thanked me for being patient, and I told her I wasn't being patient. I was having fun. She kissed my cheek and said, "That's why she loved me." We hit the bookstore next. She went straight to the art section while I wandered through fiction trying to find something that didn't bore me. She came over with a stack of books about watercolor techniques and asked if I wanted anything. I grabbed a random thriller just to have something. We sat in the corner reading for an hour, and she kept showing me pages from her books with techniques she wanted to try. Her leg pressed against mine the whole time. When we finally bought our books, she insisted on paying for mine even though I protested. She said I'd spent all morning doing what she wanted, so she could at least buy me a book. The coffee shop was her favorite spot near downtown. She knew the barista by name and ordered her usual without looking at the menu. I got the same thing because I had no idea what half the drinks were. We sat by the window, and she pulled out her sketchbook. I watched her draw the street scene outside while sipping my coffee that tasted like burnt caramel. She caught me staring and asked what I was looking at. I said I was watching her be happy. She put down her pencil and reached across the table to hold my hand. She said this was the best day she'd had in weeks. I said mine too. We stayed there until the sun started setting, and her sketchbook was full of drawings. Walking back to my car, she said, "Making me happy made her happy too," which sounded cheesy, but I knew exactly what she meant. Carson cornered me at work the next day while I was on my lunch break. He sat down across from me with this knowing grin and said I looked different. I asked what he meant, and he said I seemed lighter somehow, less stressed. He said he'd never seen me this happy before, and that even back when I was pretending to hate Allie, I smiled more, talking about her than anything else. That caught me off guard. He laughed and said, "Yeah, every time her name came up, my whole face changed." He said him and the guys noticed it months ago, but figured we'd work it out eventually. I asked why nobody said anything, and he shrugged. He said some things people need to figure out on their own. He clapped me on the shoulder and told me not to screw it up because Allie was good for me. I said I knew. He said good, then grabbed half my sandwich and left. Allie's family reunion happened on a Saturday at some park across town. She warned me in advance that her extended family was loud and nosy, and I should prepare myself. We walked up to this huge pavilion full of people and immediately got swarmed. Her aunts wanted to meet me, her cousins asked a million questions, her grandma hugged me like she'd known me forever. Someone asked how we got together, and Allie launched into the whole story. She made it funny, talking about how I destroyed her letter and how we hated each other for months. She made it romantic too, describing the library moment and prom night. Everyone laughed at the right parts and awed at the sweet parts. I just stood there watching her tell our story and fell in love with her all over again. The way she used her hands when she talked, the way she made eye contact with everyone listening, the way she looked at me when she got to the good parts. Her cousin asked if that's really how it happened, and I said yeah. She tells it better than I ever could. Allie grabbed my hand and squeezed it. Her grandma said we were a beautiful couple, and that the best relationships start with a little bit of chaos. A few days later, we were lying on my bed doing homework when Allie brought up senior year. She had her laptop open looking at class schedules. She asked if I'd thought about what classes I wanted to take. I admitted I hadn't really planned that far ahead. She pulled up the course catalog, and we started going through options together. We picked AP Literature because we both needed the credit. She wanted to take Advanced Studio Art, and I said I'd take Photography so we'd at least be in the same hallway. We talked about college visits too, how we could coordinate them, so we went together. She pulled up a map and started marking schools within 3 hours of each other. I realized this was the first time I'd thought about the future and felt excited instead of anxious. She asked if planning together was okay or if it was too much. I said it was perfect. Having someone to plan with made everything feel less scary. She said that's exactly how she felt. We spent the rest of the afternoon mapping out our senior year, like we were building something together instead of just surviving it separately. The anniversary of the day I tore up her letter arrived on a Tuesday. I'd been dreading it a little because I still felt guilty about that moment, even though everything worked out. Allie showed up at my door after school holding a pink envelope. My stomach dropped. She handed it to me with this soft smile and told me to read it. Inside was a letter written in her careful handwriting. She wrote about falling in love with me during our arguments when I'd get this look on my face like I was trying not to smile. She wrote about the class project when she realized she looked forward to seeing me every day. She wrote about every moment I thought she hated me, when really she was falling for me and didn't know how to handle it. She wrote about prom night and choosing me and never regretting it for a second. By the time I finished reading, my eyes were burning. I looked up, and she was watching me with tears in her own eyes. She said she wanted me to have a pink letter that was actually meant for me this time. I pulled her into a hug and thanked her. She said it was the least she could do after I wrote her one first. I spent that night writing her a letter back. I wrote about destroying that first letter and how it was the biggest mistake and best accident of my life. I wrote about how being mean to her was just me being scared of what I felt. I wrote about watching her sleep in the library and realizing I was completely screwed. I wrote about prom night and seeing her in that dress and knowing I'd made the right choice, telling her the truth. I wrote about how everything we have now exists because we were both brave enough to be honest when it mattered. I gave it to her the next day and she read it sitting in my car. When she finished, she folded it carefully and put it in her bag. She said we should keep writing letters to each other, make it our own private tradition. I said, yeah, 1 letter a year on the anniversary of the day, everything changed. She said, deal, then kissed me. Daniel and I went shopping for Haley's birthday present the following weekend. He asked me to come along because he had no idea what to get her. We walked through the mall throwing out ideas. He wanted something meaningful but not too serious, since they'd only been dating a few months. I suggested a nice sketchbook since she mentioned wanting to try journaling. He said that was actually a good idea. We found one with a leather cover and he bought it along with some fancy pens. Walking back to the car, he thanked me for helping. I said it was no problem. He said things felt normal between us again, and he was glad we'd moved past all the prom drama. I said me too. He asked how things were with Allie, and I said really good. He said Haley made him realize what he actually wanted in a relationship versus what he thought he wanted. I understood exactly what he meant. We grabbed food and spent the rest of the afternoon just hanging out like brothers instead of rivals. Summer started winding down and our whole friend group planned one last lake trip. Carson drove, Dominic controlled the music, Isla brought snacks, and Daniel and Haley met us there. Allie and I claimed a spot on the sand and spent the day swimming and playing games. We had a water fight that turned into everyone versus Carson, who somehow still won. We played volleyball until the sun started setting. Allie and I walked down the beach away from everyone else and watched the sky turn orange and pink. She said she couldn't believe how much had changed in just a few months. I said, yeah, this time last year we hated each other. She laughed and said she never actually hated me. She just didn't know what else to do with what she felt. I admitted the same thing. She leaned against me and said, almost losing her made me appreciate what we have even more. I wrapped my arm around her and said I wasn't planning on losing her ever again. The last night of summer, we climbed onto my roof like we used to do when we were kids. Allie brought blankets and we lay there looking at stars. She said she was excited for senior year with me by her side. I said I was excited for everything as long as she was there. She asked if I ever thought about the future, like after graduation. I said yeah, all the time now. She said she used to be scared of the future, but now she was just excited to see what happened. I told her that's because we were facing it together instead of alone. She rolled over to look at me and said, that's exactly it. We stayed up there talking until her mom texted asking where she was. I walked her home and kissed her goodnight on her porch. Looking back now, I realize the person you're meant to be with isn't always who you expect. Sometimes it's the person who challenges you and frustrates you and makes you want to be better. Sometimes you have to destroy a love letter and rebuild everything from honesty to find something real. And sometimes the girl who wrote a letter to your brother ends up being the girl who changes your whole life.